We are privileged to have Professor Andreas Schleicher as the keynote speaker for today. Professor Schleicher is the Director for Education and Skills and Special Advisor on Education Policy to the Secretary General of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD of France.
He is the recipient of numerous honors and awards. He also holds an honorary professorship at the University of Heidelberg. Without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Professor Schleicher.
Good morning, ministers, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first congratulate Hong Kong for putting vocational and professional education so centrally on your agenda. For many years, the world has looked to Hong Kong as the benchmark for success in schooling, and I have no doubt that in the years to come, Hong Kong will achieve that similarly for VPET. Nothing could be more important. Sorry, my clicker. Sorry, if someone can help me with the clicker. Does not move. Thank you. Nothing could be more important these days. In fact, what we have seen is that those with the right skills never before had the life chances they have today. But at the very same time, those with inadequate skills face greater and greater penalties. I just wish I could show you what I'm talking about. Otherwise, I just give them a sign. Yeah. If you look at if I give you a sign like this, please move the slides. If you look at global value chains, the integration of our economies today, value is increasingly created in the pre-production and post-production, the kind of skills incentives industries. But globalization also comes at a price. We see that the more deeply economies are integrated globally, the more profound is the polarization of job quality between those who have the right skills and those who have not. This is why globalization creates winners but also losers. But at the very same time, it is very important that we do not equate degrees and qualifications with skills. We have very clear evidence at the OECD that degrees do not automatically translate into better skills, better jobs, and better lives. That's why we need to think more carefully about how we develop the right skills. How do we activate them to make sure that the skills are actually deployed effectively in our economies, and how we put skills to their most effective use. Let me start with the first part of this, developing the right skills. The hardest part is often to anticipate the skills that we actually need in our economies. Employers are very good in telling you the skills they need right now, But to figure out what makes Hong Kong most competitive tomorrow and the day after tomorrow is a lot harder. A couple of years ago, the economist brought out this cover, predicting that about half of the job tasks that we know today can be actually taken over by computers today already. Robots are taking over whole factories. You have augmented reality, bringing the world's most advanced knowledge into everything we do right now. And that means the modern world no longer rewards us just for what we know. No? Google and Weibo know everything. The modern world rewards us for what we can do with what we know. And there's a lot more to come. The key is that the digital economy has become the economy. If you look about the sluggish economic growth that we have seen in much of the industrialized world, it's not because people work less. In fact, people work more intensively today than they used to do in the past. It's because productivity has grown at a much slower rate than it used to do. But if you take a more nuanced look at this, it's actually very interesting. The frontier firms, the firms that are most innovative, that use the skills of people best, that are diffusing knowledge most successfully, are actually continuing to succeeding. It is the firms that have not caught up, that are lagging behind, that are seeing declining productivity. And that's true both for the manufacturing and the service sectors. To what extent are people prepared for this? At the OECD, we recently looked at skills in the workforce, and something like, digital problem-solving skills is very central for the success of people today. And when you look among older people, 55 to 64-year-olds, you can see it's only about 1 in 10 people who are prepared for today's digital world. Now you can say, well, that's because older people are not catching up with the advances of technology. And if you look at this in the young population, it does look better. But it still doesn't look very good. Only every second young person you're going to meet out in the street in the industrialized world will have the digital problem-solving skills you need to be reasonably successful. And I'm not talking about advanced skills. These are just very practical kind of skills. And development has been very uneven. If you look, for example, to the United States, it used to be the leader in the field. If you look at this today, the United States is just doing so-so. Not because actually skills have declined, but because they have improved so much faster in other places of the world. If you look to Korea, for example, or Singapore, in the past, very few people used to develop those right skills. If you look in the young population, they're leading the field in this. So huge changes, but changes very uneven across the world. That's about one set of skills. Developing the right quality and also equity in education and training is critically important. And there you can see, as I already mentioned in the beginning part, that Hong Kong is very well positioned. When you think about the quality of learning outcomes at school, you can see Hong Kong doing well, both in terms of quality, but also in ensuring that young people from all social backgrounds get a good education. But it's not enough. If you actually think about the challenge of today, it's about fostering lifelong skills-oriented learning instead of qualifications-focused education up front. We see on the streets of our countries, please, that graduates often can no longer find jobs. While at the very same time, employers tell us they cannot find the people with the skills they need. And that is a kind of toxic mix. And you can see that very clearly in our data as well. What we measure here are the real skills of people and their formal qualifications. And if you look, for example, at Italy or Japan, you can see people with similar qualifications have a wide range of skills. Sometimes those who attained a vocational education training actually have a much higher level of real skills than those who got a university degree. But we don't have the currency to signal those kinds of skills often. We don't see those kinds of skills, and that is very important. And you can also see that, degrees mean something very different across countries. You can see, for example, a Japanese high school graduate is better skilled on average in the workforce than an Italian university graduate. The degrees actually mean something very different, and their meaning is limited because they do not represent the actual skills that people have in real time right now. And you can see that is not just a question for Italy or Japan. You can see that across countries, that the skills value of degrees and qualifications varies enormously across countries, across the world. Coming to vocational and professional education. It is so central to involve employers in designing what people learn and in delivering the programs. And that's the hardest nut to crack in vocational professional education. It's easy, the government part is easy, policy design part. But to have an actually engagement, deep engagement and commitment among employers, that is really the key. Let me show you why. You can see that nicely on this chart. It shows you the development in skills between the ages of 16 and 25. Vertically, you can see the skill score, the test score, horizontally the age. And you can see for those who are in education, the line goes up, that's the red line. So people who are in school or university actually do learn something. I'm not putting that into question. But you see actually the green line. People start typically a little bit lower because vocational and professional education still often is not the first choice of people. Let's be honest, that's the truth. We're often better in promoting vocational and professional education for other people's children. And you can see that in the skills value. But if you look at the end of the story, they come out right at the same place. The combination of education and working is actually highly conducive to the development of skills. The only people who suffer are those who have neither. Young people who are neither in education nor in employment, they actually lose out, they come out worse than where they started. So what can we learn from this? A couple of points. Integrating the world of work and the world of education is crucially important for success. And it has to do with a number of points. The first thing is to engage employers, unions, other stakeholders to make sure that the links between education and labor market needs are very, very strong. Now, in a country like, in a place like Hong Kong, and that's actually very difficult to do because you have many small and medium-sized employers. These things are easy to do when you have a large enterprise. They're really hard to do when you have a small enterprise. But there are some really good examples from around the world how you can actually do that. If you look, for example, to Norway, also lots of small and medium-sized enterprises, but they have been able to integrate systems. They provide employers with the kind of infrastructure to share their programs, to work together to design their programs, to work together to deliver them. That's very important. If you look to Switzerland, in Switzerland, companies can share apprentices. So if you can't provide all of the training for an apprentice, well, you can do part of it and another company does the other part. So it's actually becoming possible for the dominant part of our economies to actually contribute to a work-based learning. Very important part in this. Second part is, and I cannot put enough emphasis on this, is to integrate work-based learning systematically into all vocational programs. We actually at the OECD believe that this should be mandatory, that it needs to be credit-bearing, and it needs to be quality assured. If you actually look at some of the data, not everything that is called an apprenticeship has actually an apprenticeship or work-based learning inside. You can see countries like Germany, Australia, the Netherlands, where the relative share of work-based education and training is really high. People spend a lot of time with employers learning at real places with real people in real situations. But you go to Italy, the Slovak Republic, and France, they call things apprenticeships. But actually what you can see is there's very little real work-based learning experience involved. And that is crucially important for the success of those kinds of programs. It's also important to draw on employers' perspectives to assess whether content of curricula and qualifications meet the current labor market needs. Nobody knows that better than employers today. And also to guide the adaptation to what is needed tomorrow. It is very important to build adequate transversal skills in our vocational programs. Now that sounds contradictory. Many people think vocational education and professional learning is about providing very specific occupational skills. But the key for tomorrow's vocational programs will be to actually provide the right mix between occupational specific training and transversal skills that help people not just learn for their current job, but help people learn and grow with their next job. And again, the balance is shifting towards more transversal skills as part of vocational education and training. Can you please advance? It's also important to ensure that institutions and mechanisms engage employers represent the diverse perspectives. The kind of associations of employers really need to speak for the entire range of employers and not just for a few dominant companies. And also it's important to realize that those have different incentives sometimes. If you speak with employer organization, they'll actually talk about, generic skills, transversal skills. For them, that is a very normal thing to do. But actually, if you speak with individual employers, of course, they think about their skills they need right now. That should be the focus. So getting that balance right is really, really important in our experience. And together, those things have to do with ensuring that there is good information on labor market needs, that the mechanisms link provision to needs, that there is a diversity of offerings and pathways, realizing that people learn differently and sometimes differently at different stages of their lives. This is a big promise of vocational and professional learning and the engagement of the social partners. It's to do with high quality delivery, state-of-the-art facilities. That's something that we take for granted in modern universities, but there's no reason that the unit cost should be lower for vocational and professional education and training than they are for academic learning and education. In fact, there's a lot many countries can do to make sure that the facilities and the equipment and the training of people meets state-of-the-art characteristics. And last but not least, providing reliable competency-based qualifications, making sure that vocational professional learning has the right currency. And that's actually a big part of the picture often. Often young people invest a lot in their skills, but those skills are not recognized in labor markets because we are not able to model that kind of currency. So those three elements are really important. Last but not least, it's about figuring out who should pay for what, when, and how. Getting the financial incentives right. What's the role of government? What's the role of the private sector? What's the role of individuals? How are the benefits and costs of education to be shared? There's a lot, I think, we can learn, and particularly from the countries that are doing those things best today. If you can advance, please. The hardest part, perhaps, is that learning is easy. What is actually much harder is to train people to unlearn and relearn when things change. And that brings in the lifelong and life-wide dimension of vocational and professional education as a crucial feature of success. Getting people to see when the context changes and reinvest in their skills to adapt, and that's much more important in vocational and professional learning than anywhere else. If you're in an industry and that industry changes, will you be ready to adapt with the changes that automation, digitalization really bring? Let's think about some of the factors that are relevant here. The first is to, again, engage employers to provide the right mix of skills. It's about ensuring that there is good career guidance. Telling young people how the world of work looks, and you're much too late when you do that in secondary education. The best place to start with this is early in the careers of children. You do not realize how limited the knowledge of young people often is about the wonderful world of work that actually exists. So primary education can be a great place to confront young people with that kind of spectrum. It's to do with providing effective career guidance, providing reliable and also impartial sources of guidance. Who's best positioned to tell young people? Teachers are often not really well trained to provide that kind of guidance. Bringing people from the workplace into schools can be very, very effective. It has to do with establishing a coherent and independent guidance profession. It's very, very difficult to do. How do you actually bring the knowledge about the world of work into the world of education? How do you avoid the duality or dichotomy between academic and vocational learning? The future is integrated. The future actually is about combining academic and professional knowledge. But again, that means we need to be better in bringing this into children. And also, it's about supporting guidance with the resources, information, and evaluation. I think there's a lot that we can do to actually ensure that young people have access to better and more relevant information about the world of work so that they can make good choices. And in fact, when you look to countries that are doing really, really well on this, you look to Switzerland, Denmark, Norway, Germany, Austria, that's what makes a big difference. If young people actually know the world of work and they know the world of learning, they make actually good choices. They're typically really investing in the kind of careers that actually matters most for them. And it's about preparing teachers with industry experience. We need to become better in allowing people who may not have, ticked all the boxes of, becoming a teacher to get into professional learning. To ensure that people with great industry experience actually do get a chance to actually contribute to educating young people. Providing more flexible inroads into education and learning seems to be a very important part of the picture that we really need to actually consider. I already mentioned this, but I will mention it once more. Maximizing the use of workplace training. Giving people access to work with real people, real machines, real tools. And this is something that is very, very engaging and very, very important. Together, this is about using effective tools to engage stakeholders and promoting transparency. But together, this is about integrating the world of work and the world of learning. The challenge is always, to find the right balance between what students like to do, what employers need, and what serves the purpose of our future economies. That's about the development of the right skills. I want to speak briefly about, making sure that we also activate the skills. Making sure that people actually get a good chance to use their skills effectively in our economies. And there are many countries where there are too many barriers in our labor market that prevent people with the right skills actually to use those skills effectively. And that brings me to the last part of my presentation, putting skills to effective use. It's about, providing, first of all, better information about the skills that are needed and the skills that are actually available. It sounds so simple, but it is actually not. If you look at our data, you can see, for example, in many countries, there is a significant share of people who are overqualified for their current jobs and who are underqualified for their current jobs. There's a lot of skills mismatch in our economies, qualifications mismatch in our economies. Some people conclude from this, well, maybe we have invested too much in education and learning. But that's actually not the case. What you see here is qualifications and degree mismatch. When you actually look at actual skill mismatch, now you test the skills that people actually have, you can see the numbers get a lot smaller. Most countries for which we have data have less than 1 in 10 people who have actually better skills than what they need for their current job, not to speak of their next one. In fact, most of our economies have already depleted the talent pool that exists in the countries. So how do you reconcile those two parts? We have significant qualifications mismatch. We have actually much less skill mismatch. Well, the answer is actually very simple. The answer is that our signaling systems are not very good. Our degrees and qualifications are not very good in actually signaling the real skills that people have. And that's why many employers have difficulties finding the right skills. And this shows you the consequences. If you have a high-skilled job and you have great skills, well, you're fine. You earn very much when you are 30 and you keep growing in your earnings on average across countries. That's the green line. If you have a highly skilled job but you don't have the right skills yet, you earn a little bit less, and that's no surprise because your employer is not going to pay you for the skills you don't have, but you keep growing in your earnings. In fact, the skills deficit for individuals is in a way a good thing for people. But if you have a kind of skilled surplus, your skills are not being used. You start low and you end up even lower. And not to speak of the kind of low skill match situation. Let's not discount that entirely. Most of our economies actually have quite stable, unfortunately quite stable, low-skilled equilibria, where basically employers make money with using lots of low-skilled people, and actually low-skilled people have very little of an incentive to invest in upgrading their skills. And you can see that this actually has significant consequences. So skills match and mismatch do have real consequences for individuals and economies, and we need to become better in reconciling them. Helping young people gaining a foothold in the labor market, and again, that's where vocational and professional education are so successful. In virtually every country for which we have comparative data, countries with a well-established vocational and professional training systems do better in the transition from young people from education to work than people who have more or solely an academic culture. Making skills more transparent. If you have great skills but nobody knows about them, that's not good for you, that's not good for your economy. And it's still a very, very common situation. A lot of learning that happens at the workplace does not translate into certificates that actually make them recognizable. Helping employers to make better use of their employees' skills. Here I show you some really interesting data. Remember before I said, well, Japan is doing so well in equipping people with great skills. That's true. And the United States is no longer doing very well in equipping people with the right skills. That's also true. But look at this chart. This is actually about the capacity of industries and economies to absorb skills, to use skills. And no country does better than the United States in translating better skills into better jobs and better lives of people. The economy is very, very sensitive to the skills of people, and it's actually very, very good in extracting value from the skills. And that's something where many countries in Asia still have to learn a lot, making better use of the skills of people, making labor markets more flexible, more dynamic, more mobile. And you need, of course, both sides of the equation. Develop the right skills and actually bringing them to effective use. And that's something to really look at. And this is also something that explains much of the gender gap in wages. Some people say, well, you know, the fact that men and women earn differently in similar occupations is something to do with unfairness among employers, but actually much of this comes down to the way in which skills are being utilized in our economies. You can explain much of the wage gap between men and women simply by the extent to which their jobs extract value from their skills and use their skills. So becoming better at this is very, very important. Creating more high value added jobs, I mentioned this already, global value chains have sort of polarized the world. You make money at the pre-production stage and the post-production stage, whereas in the center of production, things become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and more automated. Very, very important to actually move up the value chain, and there's some really good examples helping local economies to actually move up. And it's also about fostering more entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is something that you learn best at very young ages. We have actually data showing that, you know, the older people come, the harder it is for people to create that spirit of entrepreneurship. So in a nutshell, that's really what this is about. It's about developing the right skills, making the place of work, of learning and work integrated. It's about activating them, and it is about putting skills to effective use. High quality initial education and training will always be at the center. It's much, much harder to repair things and to do things right from the very first point. Making learning everybody's business. Finding out, you know, who does what best and who pays for what, when, and how is crucially important for success. It's about effective links between learning and work, giving people access to real kind of opportunities at the workplace to develop their skills, to people with workplace experience. Some people learn much better working with those kinds of people than just working with teachers. It's about allowing workers to adapt learning to their lives. Now, rather than compressing people into degrees and qualifications, giving people more discretion to decide when they learn, how they learn, what they learn, where they learn. And again, vocational and professional education and training are the key to making that really work well. It's about improving transparency. It's about easy to find information about adult education activities. Now, where do I learn? Where can I upgrade my skills later in life? It's about actually having this kind of information at our fingertips. It's about career guidance. Real-time data about demand for and supply of skills and competent personnel who have the latest labor market information at their fingertips. And who is better positioned than people who actually do work in our most successful economies and industries. Helping employers make better use of worker skills. Now you saw the discrepancy between Japan and the United States on that part is very important. And it's also about helping economies move up the value chain. So that's really what I wanted to share with you this morning. I think we do have very, very good evidence that vocational and professional learning throughout our lives is going to be key to the success of our economies tomorrow. It's about integrating the world of work and the world of learning. And there are many, many policy experiences across the world that show that can be achieved. You can look to countries like, Switzerland, Germany, Austria, and Europe that have done that for, almost centuries. Centuries, and you can say, well, can we actually emulate this? And the answer is, there are countries that have been much more recently on a very, very successful track in actually implementing those kinds of policies. If you look at the last 10, 15 years, vocational and professional learning has really made the grade and is advancing. So I think we are on a good track on this. Thank you very much.